Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Sheina Burnett. Police brutality affected me directly because my cousin, Erd Pierre, he was killed by NYPD December 20th, 2021, while having a mental health episode. He was only 26. He called 911. The police showed up, and 10 minutes later, he was dead, 10 shots. And ever since then, I've just been advocating for him, just trying to keep his spirit alive, just make sure that he has some dignity still, because the way they killed him and then they immediately said it was suicide by cop, we thought that's not how even though that's part of the brutality too, right? The way they try to taint your character, they use your background against you because he had a history of illness and, a previous suicide attempt. So we just fought back. It's not easy, but right, it just has to be done. It's still happening. Police still have this sort of power, this gang-like, mob-like mentality that they can't be touched, no matter what happens, they get away with it, no matter how tragic, no matter if they're in the wrong. Sometimes it's right in your face that they're wrong, but they still get away with it. They still get to be justified, and they keep doing it. So I'm glad I met, Adrian, Kathie, just people who could help me with my grief, but still fight for justice. Thank you.
Hi everybody. Thanks for being here. And my name is Joshua Lopez. I'm the nephew of John Collado, who was also murdered by NYPD officers. I've been fighting for a long time, way before my uncle was killed. Back when I was 13 years old, 1992, when the Rodney King broke out the riots in LA because of the beating the LAPD gave Rodney King. There was also somebody in my neighborhood named Jose Kiko Garcia that was murdered by police officers. I didn't personally know him, but I seen that my neighborhood was really upset with the killing. So there was riots and all that. And it's like the King of Peace said, Martin Luther King. He said riots are the voices of the unheard. Sometimes you get tired of people they are not listening to your cries for justice and accountability. So I've been fighting for over 30 years already against police brutality. So on September 6th of 2011, my family was personally affected by police killing. My uncle was in his own neighborhood attempting to break up a fight between his neighbor and another man that he didn't recognize, and that man was an undercover police officer. As my uncle attempted to break up the fight, the police officer pulled out his gun and shot my uncle dead. So the media asked the NYPD, has this officer ever used his weapon before prior to killing my uncle? But the NYPD supposedly didn't know if he ever used his weapon before, and he actually did. 2 years prior to killing my uncle, he had murdered an 18-year-old kid, so this was his second killing. If he would have been held accountable for his first killing, my uncle might have still been alive today. So, and from fighting for so many years, I learned that my uncle's killing wasn't an isolated incident. This happens every day in America. Just last year alone, we had about 1,340 murders. But not every murder makes national news, like the George Floyd's, Eric Garner, Michael Brown. Not every killing making national news like that. So that's why it's on us, families and organizers, to speak up and expose what's going on. Because if we didn't, there might be more than 1,300 murders a year. They might reach thousands and thousands of people killing. So that's why we cannot be silent about the things that matter, especially our families, our community. So when Michael Brown was murdered in St. Louis, this small town called Ferguson these young warriors, they did an uprising, and Obama, who was president, he sent his attorney general to St. Louis Ferguson, not because a black man was killed by police, because we know that that happens every day in America, but he did it just to silence the people in Ferguson from uprising. That same year, we had Eric Garner murdered just about 2 weeks before Michael Brown. So yeah, I'm gonna continue to fight, and I'm gonna continue to expose what's going on with policing. So far, I have about 82 names on my body tattooed of people that have been killed by police. I have 45 names on my back and 37 on my front. I have a fist on my back with names of people that have been killed by police. And I'm working on a new tattoo that says say their names, and inside the letters I've been writing names of people that have been murdered by police. So yeah, like I said, I'm gonna continue to expose what's going on and continue to fight, because this is still going on in America. Not every killing is making national news. So thank you guys.
So yeah, the families the loved ones of those who've been killed play a very important role in exposing the realities of police violence and police murder, because most of the general public, they only hear what's covered in the news, and what's covered in the news is based on police reports and police statements, because they're like the official voices that news media turn to get the story, and the initial story that comes out tends to be a cover-up of some sort. And that's a story that sticks to the general public's memory. So when it comes out later what actually happened, most people don't really find out about that. So then the police violence gets justified in their minds, that somebody might have had a weapon, or they had drugs on them, or has a record which has nothing to do with why did we get killed, but but people justified in their heads then that was a good kill, it was justified. So families that speak out are very important in telling the stories and showing like this is what happens, but also the way that the families themselves are attacked and silenced and isolated and made to feel that it was something that you do wrong, especially for parents of those who were killed by police, who are kind of depicted as being bad parents, not raising them right or whatever. And so it gets justified even further that these are just menace to society, that we're removed from society by the good cops who protect us and make us feel safe. So I'm always in all the families who come out and speak and tell their stories, as painful as it is, because each time they tell the story, it just opens up those wounds again, over and over again. One of the things that the it's a long name, October 22nd Coalition to Stop Police Brutality, Repression, the Criminalization of a Generation. One of the things we work on is the Stolen Lives Project, which documents those killed by law enforcement, U.S. law enforcement in particular. And one of the important aspects of it that I think is that we try to keep track of every case. So it's not like, because we've had people who ask, like, when we had like the Stolen Lives banner, which we don't have one currently, but we need to make a new one. When they see like the thousands and thousands of names, sometimes people ask, well, what were they doing at the time? And it's like, it doesn't matter what they were doing at the time. They're not supposed to get killed. That's not the job of police. But I think that's the problem too, is that there's this need to have to justify a police killing in order to feel that we are in a society that works. The system that we live under works and protects us and makes us feel safe, which is the problem with, and that's addressed as the topic of this forum too, that after we have thousands, maybe millions of people rising up and saying, no, we're not going to take this anymore, in terms of how that gets curbed by funded organizations, nonprofit organizations, and trying to, I guess, kind of maintain the status quo in some way, but curb people's anger into something that's supposedly more productive, like getting people to vote or whatever else. But the October 22nd Coalition was formed in 1996, And the main purpose of its formation then was that there was a need for national visible action to show that there are plenty of people in this country that are not willing to stand by and let police violence continue, like criminalization of Black and brown youth continue, the repression of political activists, political prisoners continue, and it started in '96 and it's continued since. Because by '97 it's like we kind of still need this because things haven't gotten better. So we try to continue this work. In the last couple of years, we've been trying to revamp the work that we're doing. And part of it is because there are so many, since 2020, but also by 2014, so many other organizations have formed. And there has been this capitalizing of people's anger and rage in trying to, shepherd them into other ways, and most times it is just maintaining grants and funding for an organization. So a lot of what we stress, the need to be out on the street, for people to stand together, to stand united, regardless of what your politics are, or like what your race is, or whatever else, that it's important for people to stand together, and that's how we get power. That's how we are able to fight back. One thing that we are doing currently, we launched this last year, was trying to form an emergency response network. And we have some flyers in the back there. This thing, if you want to grab one. Just to be able, because we already have some formation in place of being a national organization and being able to organize nationally, we wanted to be a lot more organized, I guess, and also more effective in letting people know, like, this is what's going on, and this is what we can do together across the country. So we're hoping that more people can get involved, and it's not like we have the answers for how to fix police brutality, but we just feel that the more people that are involved, that work together and feel empowered to go out and stand together, and especially standing with families who need our support, to need us as collaborators, and that can strengthen our movement, and hopefully we'll eventually topple the system. So that's not an official line of the coalition, but
I'm with it.
Thank you.
A lot of like what you said, Kathie, like my story flows from a bit. I grew up in South Queens, so I seen how like the police operate down there. But it wasn't until 2020 and the death of George Floyd where I started getting involved in the battles against the police in the street, and being side by side with like peers from high school, total strangers, and like hundreds of thousands of people was an insane feeling, and made me double down on like what I believe, just that they're out of control, they are tyrants, and that nothing other than making them scared in the streets is going to actually like make them move. By the time the summer of 2020 rolled around, there was an attempt to occupy space, City Hall in New York, and this was maintained for like around maybe a month or two before the police came in and started cracking down. And it was a small thing. There was no strategy behind it, really. It was kind of like just to be in the face of the system. But what it had turned into was a lot of poor people coming and sleeping and taking care of one another. And what ended up happening was the police came and swept all those people away, and quite brutally, and I was swept up in that. But afterwards, I was seeking out like what to do, because the rampant plague of reformism and like nonsensical ideologies meant only to divert people away from the struggle was what was in leadership of the movement at the time, and still is to this day. And so I seeked out how to actually like go to the people who are affected, like trying to go to the projects, trying to go to like where I know people are up against this. I had read an interview in the Kites Journal about the October 22nd coalition, and it was a very inspiring piece. And I'd never like heard of something like that. The only example I've ever seen at the time was Black Lives Matter, and it paled in comparison in terms of like its like genuine like core, which is like the families, and them being like the leaders in the mass movement and like fermenting that anger and rage towards the system and against those who are oppressing them. I linked up with Dare to Struggle not too long after that, and the mission was clear. Like, we go to the masses who are up against these contradictions in society, and we bring them out as leaders in the struggle, and to like make them the makers of history, you know. And I don't see a way out of that, out of this fucked up problem called police brutality, other than actually uniting with the families. So I really thank you guys for being here. I know my story's had a bit of a different trajectory, you know, but we're all in this here. Adrian, would it be cool to kind of move on to summing up some points?
Yeah, that's we're gonna go briefly over some of the findings from our social investigation that are in the pamphlet, some of the ideas like put forward in it, and hopefully like that then opens up the discussion where we can continue just talking about what the experience has been.
Word. I guess to sort of start, I know these are like hot off the presses, but I don't know if anyone got a chance to read through it a bit. But I can kind of sum it up as such. There is a very particular way that the police exact their brutality on very specific sections of the people, particularly, like, we use this term colloquially, but like the lower and deeper sections of people, like, you know, the most dispossessed, folks who are living in the projects, you know, folks in neighborhoods that have been defunded, gentrified, and with populations that have been criminalized, mostly Black and Latino masses. And so we set out to actually like go learn from these people just how the police are exacting this brutality. And so we came up with a couple of questions, namely, how do you see the police operating out here? What do you see as an alternative to this way that like the police come in and like police neighborhoods? What's a different form of social regulation that society could take up to do away with this disastrous problem? As well as other questions like, what do you think of this idea of abolishing the police and prisons outright? And we wanted to get a full scope of things, so we went out to, you know, we went out to 4 boroughs because I think Staten Island's a lost cause. But we went to a number of different housing projects, and I would say around 50 to 60 people, and we learned a couple of things. Namely, to go back to this earlier point, the police are exacting their brutality on very specific sections of people, namely poor Black people, the homeless, and the mentally ill, as well as like surplus populations, people who maybe don't work formally, maybe like have a hustle on the side, all the way up to sex workers in different parts of the city. And not only that, but also against those who rebel against the system. You have the protests, the rebellions in 2020 as a very good example of that. Just hundreds of thousands of people being pepper sprayed, shot with rubber bullets, the finest military equipment that they could scrape off from the Iraq and Iran war was used and deployed on civilians in order to stop the rebellions. You have the protests against the genocide that Israel is carrying out against the Palestinian people, where people are like kettled into pens, and then as soon as it hits nightfall, they're like clinked up, pushed out. And that's a little bit removed from the police, but you have like the doxing of these individuals. So we have a large scope of problems. I think quite a different number of people and sections of people have beef with the NYPD. Now, the numbers on this are quite stark, and I kind of want to start from our forays into places like Brownsville, South Queens, and housing project developments in New York, namely where mostly like poor black people are concentrated in large numbers. And the alarming thing is that there are a myriad of contradictions among the people, infighting between people for a plethora of issues, like day-to-day life squabbles, all the way up to, and what is predominantly focused on here, territory carved out by rival gangs, and even when it came to sex workers in Jackson Heights, the people leading those kinds of things also carving out territory. And this creates friction among this like very vulnerable group of people. But for a better understanding of like what I'm trying to get at here is that these divisions among the people are actually being exacerbated and fomented by the NYPD. And I would go as far as to say like police departments around the country, like taking this up as a kind of policy of containment. Because who has been coming out the most in the last decade, 2 decades, like actually taking the system on? It has been poor black people. It has been people in the lowest sections of society, like uppercutting the system and throwing it on its ass every time, So you have the case of the New York City housing developments, where over the last 2 decades, there have been a number of gang raids that have targeted youth and young people in these projects and putting them and looping them into these RICO conspiracy charges. Now, one example that we bring up in the section on the war on black youth is the Bronx 120 case in 2016. So around 120 people were clinked up by this RICO conspiracy. The NYPD was touting it as the largest gang takedown in New York City history. They were foaming at the mouth to celebrate it before they even went in with cops into the development. But what doesn't get talked about is the way that the police actually created the circumstances for that conspiracy. Because in 2007, when this alleged conspiracy in the Bronx Eastchester Gardens development began, the average age of the defendants in the Bronx 120 case at the time was 9 to 14 years old. Which means that for years, the NYPD surveilled these children. And instead of intervening or doing what regular people would probably do and try to step in, maybe have a heart, they let that shit play out. Now, this isn't new, and to many of the people who we spoke to get these findings, this isn't new at all. But what needs to be understood is just how precise that the NYPD are able to provoke these divisions among the people to keep people in a life of crime and to keep them in that situation so they can justify their brutality against the masses, right? So you do have some alarming statistics on the gun violence in the city. NYPD statistics say that from 2019 to now, youth gun battles and youth gun crimes have gone up double on both sides of the barrel, right? And so when we talk to the masses about this, and we went out to Brownsville specifically on these questions, it's kind of like the youth get brought up a lot because there's a feeling that they're the next generation, but they're not doing too great, right? And when we ask the reasons for why that would be, it all comes down to austerity and defunding from city governments to programs that would actually help get kids off the street, like after school programs, things like that. And also just like the bankruptcy of nonprofit organizations and the stuff that they pump out to try to bring people together. I think, yeah, one of you guys was bringing that up. Just like how it also like takes away from the struggle and takes away from like the anger of people towards the police and towards like the system that's oppressing them. So all that to say is that in regards to this section of people, it's quite clear from many examples just how the police prey upon the youth, prey upon poor black people in the JECs, and actually keep them in the situation contained and allow these things to fester among people. One particularly striking things in our findings, and this has actually come out in some news stories recently, was just how the police will, in unmarked cars, stalk the youth and stalk people on the block chilling, and will even throw up gang signs, rival gang signs, throw up just to provoke people and have an excuse to like clamp down on them, right? So this, I'm going on a lot, but the problem is we're not even done. In terms of our efforts among this section of people and like our efforts to intervene in instances of police brutality, we started getting challenged by the masses. Like, you should come when it's actually hot. You come when it's actually not safe. Because then you'll see how the youth wild out, or you'll see how the police wild out. Depends on who you're talking to, right? So we did. We went out at night, and we had the pleasure of actually confronting one of these unmarked cars who were pulling up on a group of guys on a corner, just chilling outside, and they sped off. They didn't want any of it, But from there, we were just able to learn just how divided people are along the lines of territory, and that's why this pamphlet is named as such, Poverty and Territory. It's the reason for crime in these neighborhoods, at least told by the masses we spoke to. But then where that comes from is the police maintaining and containing this group of people's oppression. And this is a form of social control that we can see dating back to the era of Jim Crow and even further against this population. And I don't know if that kind of makes some sense, or if there's any questions on that kind of, section here. Cool, okay. So going right back to some of our efforts against police brutality from Dare to Struggle, in the spring, we united with the family of Raul de la Cruz, a Dominican man from the Bronx who was having a schizophrenic episode at the time. His father, not wanting to get the police involved, called 311 mental health services. The unfortunate reality is that if you call and you say that the person has some sort of a weapon on them, this call gets redirected to 911. The cops arrive, and within 30 seconds, they shoot Raul around 6 to 7 times. And luckily, he survived the incident. But we immediately united with the family and asked, like, what do you want to do about this? Like, what is your lawyer saying? We just try to put the pieces together, and they wanted to pull up on the precinct from the pigs who shot their boy. So that's what we helped them do. We called the press, we had a number of journalists come, and the family took it upon themselves to actually like cross the street we were on and confront the police directly, chanting, pedimos ayuda, balazos no, which is, we ask for help, not a shooting. And this incident was kind of our first foray into like uniting with the family to actually assert, the political battle here, which is that the criminalization of mental illness by the police has led to the deaths of thousands of people around the country. The statistic that we cite in the pamphlet specifically is that, at least from the Washington Post's tracking, and maybe it's not the best kind of, but it's that that 20% of the victims of police brutality since 2015 have been people with going through mental illness episodes, or have some form of mental illness. And the striking thing here is that when we actually, did this with the family, one of the demands that was being made was to actually have the police officers' names and badge numbers revealed. And from what I understand up until this point now, we still don't know who shot Raul. And he's fine, but I don't think he'll ever be the same again. Last time I saw him, he was, had a hard time walking around, he's just trying to live his life. And now he's forever scarred because these, trigger-happy pigs came who didn't even know Spanish and resorted to just shooting a man who was in need of help. So, in terms of, responding to incidents like this, if we actually create a culture of uniting with the victims of police brutality and the families affected, we can actually make it a problem for these police departments, make it a problem for the people defending and hiding these pigs from facing any sort of consequences. And that's what we intend to do. Now, it doesn't stop there, because another section of people that the NYPD specifically is targeting their brutality on are a group of people who are often at the intersection of dispossession, mental illness, and the myriad of problems that come with being oppressed in the society, being in the lowest rungs, and that's the homeless people. Not just in New York City, but around the country, there have been these operations between the police departments and the departments of sanitation in any given city that are clearing the streets of homeless people. Now, this is coming at a time when there's often, rising rents. There's the problem of gentrification that maybe is a little bit outside of the scope of this conversation right now, but nonetheless is connected. And so the police have been being sicked on the homeless by real estate developers, by the city, to maintain this out of sight and out of mind policy. In New York City specifically, Mayor Adams, along with Department of Homeland Security, Department of Sanitation in 2019, made a policy of clearing the homeless out of the streets, with the asterisk that they will actually be trying to help shelter the homeless after they clear out their encampments. But 99.9% of the almost 1,200 people swept up by these basically raids on encampments and tents in the street are still homeless. And that came from the city themselves. Their auditor said, this was a complete disaster. So we specifically got down to asking people, okay, so what is the answer for this? How is there a different way of doing things? What do you think of this idea of abolishing the police and prisons? But how could that be the case when the number one thing that the police are using against the people is their hatred for other sections of people? That is fermented in the media, that's fermented culturally among us as people. Our daily interactions, being poor and being in poor neighborhoods, And so they are specifically smearing the homeless, smearing now with the migrant crisis, incoming immigrants who have slept in the streets of 8 different countries just to get here, only to arrive in the richest country and richest empire in human history to sleep outside of a hotel on the street. So the reactionary news outlets, fermenting this hatred of the homeless, fermenting this hatred of migrants and other oppressed groups of people, and especially back to the issue of the youth, saying it's drill music, it's all these secondary issues but never addressing the source of these problems, which is a system that allows people to be sleeping out on the street, a system that allows people to live with arsenic-ridden water, with holes in their wall, rats and roaches crawling on them. This is the reality for people in the lowest rungs of society. And the police know this, and they prey upon these divisions to keep crime in these neighborhoods and maintain their domination and their reign of mass incarceration around the city. And we asked a lot of people like just what they see, and this is what it's come down to: the youth, the homeless, and the poor. We also have the rebels, and the people popping out for Palestine, the people who like come out and give the police what for in the streets, But the problem is that there's a disconnect between these groups and the most oppressed. And we want to bridge that gap by actually bringing the people affected out to be a part of these struggles. That's kind of an overview on our findings. I'd like to get into some of our subjective efforts and kind of what we see going forward, but I wonder if there's any questions on some of these conclusions that we're drawing.
The first question I had for the panel was for people to speak on just thoughts on how things have developed, how things have changed. Because we went out, we investigated, we've been in this struggle for a little bit, but how you've been seeing it, something as brutal and serving the same purpose for so long, but still having some development, some change, how police brutality has shaped up in the last couple of years. Or any thoughts on some of the findings that you have, if you guys would like to chime in.
Well, I want to contribute something. I don't know if it'll answer your question, but just the part about Dare to Struggle and how you guys kind of make it your mission to reach out to the families impacted the same way October 22nd Coalition does in Stolen Lives. And I think that's so empowering and so important. For me and for my family, when died 2 years ago, we didn't have that, We just had, the police having this press conference talking about and saying, oh, it's suicide by cop. Oh, he called 911. He said he had a knife and a gun, and didn't find a gun. He did have a knife, but we don't really talk about that because we don't think that justifies you guys, meeting someone in crisis who wasn't even confrontational to begin with, just pacing back and forth in a subway. You guys show up, it's 30 officers deep, all these flashing lights, all these commands, all this hostility, and then you think that he's gonna respond to you rationally. And so they say that ran towards them with a knife, and we automatically said, no, he was scared. He called 911 for help, and you guys came and you attacked him. You tased him, shouting at him. So he was running in fear. So we just, 2 days later, we had a press conference. We reached out to all these people. I was involved a lot in the 2020 protests, Black Lives Matter, and there was organizing everywhere and people protesting everywhere, but that didn't really happen with ERD. And we reached out to everyone we could, and we just thought oh my gosh, we're gonna have so much support, it's showing that this is still happening, and still no one. So we did the press conference, and the first thing we said was you guys are not gonna say suicide by cop in this case. And I think the media has a special position where they too should not repeat words like that, which luckily enough, when you guys, when you see them talk about now, they say he was killed by police, and they don't say suicide by cop. So I want to hope that moving forward, the media really pays attention to how they tell the story of how the police tell the story, because the police shouldn't be able to
construct the narrative.
Right, and then people just run with it, which almost I think that's what empowered us, like not really having so much support in the beginning, but knowing like this is our loved one. He had family, he had people who cared about him. He wasn't just someone, in the subway antagonizing people or anything like that. Like he was in crisis, he needed help. You guys didn't help him. So in a way, I think them trying to paint this picture empowered us to make sure that, like, again, dignity. I keep bringing up that word. Shot him 10 times in the middle of the street. You didn't shut down traffic. It was such a danger. You didn't shut down traffic. You didn't evacuate the subway station. You just had him lying in the street, shot dead, arrested him while he's lying on the floor, and then eventually you decide to call ambulance to get him some help. So I just think that it's very important that at the beginning, if families can have that support, because they're not like the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors and the, Trayvon Martins. It's very hard to keep this going, So I just want to touch on that I think it is very important, just supporting the families and seeing how they can keep their loved one's memory alive, but still, push for change. So I just wanted to say that.
I mean, some of our going down these findings, and when we were talking to people, we made it a point not to talk to leftist activists, nonprofit, organizers and things like that, because they just have a certain program of what they're trying to do. But the people affected are always going to be raw with it. They're always going to be straightforward of this is the problem. The contradiction we run into, though, however, is that because of things like the co-optation of the movement, because of the lack of support that family members do get, you have this overwhelming sense of pessimism among the masses that says well, there was all these protests and it didn't go anywhere. There's all these people came out and did this. I mean, you guys want to be like the Black Panthers and the Young Lords, but they got killed. I'm not trying to get killed, But we meet that with finding the fighters, and I think that's what the nonprofits and stuff are a little scared of too. That's because it's gonna get in the way of that,
I think to Adrian's question about changes, I think one major shift is that, when I wasn't around when October 22nd started, I got involved in 2000, and I remember how hard it was to talk to people about police brutality back then. There was so much pushback. So I think one major shift is that it's more of a cultural, social acceptance that police brutality is a bad thing now, whereas before it was kind of what do you mean? One thing that our national coordinator who got killed years ago, but one thing the anecdote she likes to tell is that if she's wearing her t-shirt that says, stop police brutality, and people go up to her and be like, why are you anti-cop? And she was like, it doesn't say I'm anti-cop. It says stop police brutality. So what are you saying? But I think there is a more general attitude that is a lot more skeptical. I can't talk right now, of the police side of the story. Whereas before it was more easily accepted. So I think there's a lot more skepticism towards law enforcement and their story, their narrative, what they say. Every time there's a press conference, I think more people are a little more I don't know, So I think there has been a major shift with that. But also there's been police brutality became a sexy topic for a while, so everybody was on board with it. Everyone's posting about it, and it's Black Lives Matter became something that was capitalized on greatly. So corporations, any organizations, it's well, we need to be on board in order to be cool and down with it, So I think that major shift is important, but at the same time, that gets easily co-opted and commodified. And then at the same time, it's easy to steer people away from what needs to be done then. And if it's something that seems more, if you want to fight to change the system, that's a harder sell to people than, okay, we're gonna have this specific program and push this specific law, or something that seems more concrete, and more people are open to, like, well, we just have to vote this person to office and they're gonna change this thing. Or we're gonna have this one specific program, and that's what's gonna solve everything. So I think when people see that there are more, when there are like seemingly concrete solutions, that's a lot more appealing than saying we need to change this system and the structure that's in place that's maintaining you know, police brutality as a norm. Because that's a lot harder to fight, and it takes a lot more sacrifice to fight that. So I think that's, so at the same time that we have more people that are willing to go out there and stand up or say something against police brutality, it's a lot harder to like channel that rage and that anger, that need for change into something that will actually make change for the better of everyone.
Yeah, you pointed that out, to be honest. I think because I'm in it, it's hard for me to see a change, you know what I mean? Because like, even looking at this, like, to me, it's still happening, you know what I mean? But I'm glad, I like that perspective that you said, that the police brutality, it is easier to speak on and stuff like that. I don't know. For me, it was hard for me to answer that question because it happened to me, you know what I mean? And it's so recent, I can't really see a change yet. But I am appreciative, like there are people out here, you know, we're doing the work, you know, we're organizing, we're connecting and stuff. So I know it's happening, you know what I mean? But I think because it's like I'm in it and being with the you know, involved so much in the 2020 protests, and now I'm still like seeing it happening, it's hard for me. But I like your perspective, and it's true, yeah.
And I just want to add that the changes that I have seen is like the changes of the faces on the victims, the changes in policing politics. Before, when I was growing up, we seen a lot of like Italian and Irish cops doing this to our community. But now you see black and brown cops doing the same thing that they were doing. And New York City is almost all our politicians are either black or Latino, and we still haven't gone through the same problems. So, you know, that's why I rather us like fight and struggle for abolish and not reform. Reform sounds like you're going from like a rope to a police bullet. So yeah, that's why I agree. We do need to abolish these police, and also the billions of dollars that they get, the police department, we need to put that into our community, like for enforcement on drug programs, schools, and you know, better options than policing. Policing is just gonna cause more harms to our community and not help.
It's actually one of the.
Good question. Sir, yeah, what are your thoughts on body cams, and has that made a difference? And I've read recently that a lot of the NYPD aren't actually turning them on, which is a problem. But do you think that that's something that would help and has it in your research?
When did body cams come out? Like hardcore, like mid 2000s.
2010s Obama era.
Yeah. I'm just gonna read like the first kind of sentence of our pamphlet, which goes into like, well, the last sentence of the first paragraph, which is basically, across the country, police have been on a nonstop rampage, killing at least 1,232 people in 2023, just 2023 alone. And I believe that statistic was up a couple hundred bodies from 2022.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the most succinct way I can say of saying like, hell no, it hasn't done much.
What, the body cameras?
Yeah.
Yeah, we barely see the cameras on police. We just see what's convenient for them. They do more editing than a movie director. Yeah, so we don't always see the whole picture there. They put out what they want.
But if that was like, if it wasn't allowed to be edited, right, and if it was like more of just a stream of what happened, it seems like that would be a useful.
I found it useful, personally.
Way to sort of see like what happened, right?
Yeah, it could, like, as a as someone who watched what happened to my cousin, instead of only what the police said, like, yeah, they, cut certain parts out, and then they try to take sounds out of different places so you don't really hear, what's happening. But it helps a little bit, I think, just for me personally speaking. But yeah, I don't think it changed much. Like you said, a lot of times they don't use it. They still get away with it. You see them killing the people, and they still get away with it. So.
We seen Eric Garner get lynched in front of the whole world, and the cop just got away with it. Yeah. No criminal charges.
If anything, makes us more mad. It just makes us more mad.
I guess that the intention was, an intention was maybe some form of deterrence, where it's like they may pause a little before they do something because they're like, oh, I have my camera recording everything I'm saying and doing. I mean, maybe it helps in some circumstances, but I think ultimately, like with any form of reform, it's not going to change much. It's like, I'm sure there are some people whose lives may have been saved because there were body cams that were on, even if it was just the cop remembering it's on and deciding not to do something, but ultimately, like with everything else, they'll find a way around not having it impact in the end.
I have one thing I want to say on this question, and I want to also take more questions and comments. I think to what Artie was saying, and to answer the question more directly, it's like police brutality has only gotten worse, and all the evidence points in that direction.
Even with shining light on it.
Even the body camera thing is like a point of departure for understanding that, right? Because what does that do? You have body camera footage that gets recorded and put out sometimes, and that has a double effect. On the one hand, it's actually served as exposure for what's happened, and people see that and they get angry and they want to do something. The negative aspect is that, all right, there's this body camera footage and the cops who might have shot someone and killed somebody or hurt somebody or done just a brutal act for the whole world to see, who get away with it. Doesn't that embolden the cops? So it's, in other words, you can have the other aspect of it being you can record it, you can expose it as much as you want, and still nothing gets done to the cops, and so then more cops around the country see that, who fucking cares if people are filming me? Who cares if I have body camera footage if I can just go around and do whatever I want anyways?
Right.
So that's, both a positive and negative aspect. I don't mean to say that to undermine the power of exposure, and that people can actually be moved if, we put it in front of their faces and they're like, look what they did to this person. But I see that almost the same way. I don't know if you guys have seen these crazy fucking TikToks that the IDF soldiers put out, from Gaza, where they'll go in and they'll occupy these homes. They expose themselves. These cops, these pigs, they expose themselves to all the time, every day. And so I don't see it as a policy, I think it's bullshit. But as something that can be seen by people to get a sense of what the fuck is going on, I think it's fine. But let's also be aware of this other aspect of it where, if it's such a widespread practice and they still get away with it, then it's not really, what is that really doing? And it was implemented by the Obama administration to have that effect, ultimately to make it seem like they're doing something to actually address this whole police brutality thing without actually doing anything to do anything. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Do you have something you wanted to add or a question?
I'd love to. Just speaking on the question of body cams, the recent New York Times Magazine article actually raises some serious questions about that, but we need to take it to another level of understanding, because ultimately, as you're pointing out, it doesn't really mean anything unless it's in the right hands. This question more is a question of a policy that's being implemented by police services throughout the country. Police, like the military, are arms and enforcers of policy. And it may differ in different locales. And we might see different representations of how that's implemented or used. But, I think the recent last year where, I think it's Memphis, where they had 5 black cops beating the shit out of this brother.
Tyre
Okay.
Tyre
Nichols.
Nichols.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's so many names,
Yeah.
I can't stay in touch. So, but these motherfuckers, excuse my language, these motherfuckers are proud that the body cams are on, because this is something that they were actually servicing with their own fellow pigs. I think the point here is that we've got to get back to a larger question, because I personally am not somebody who's for, I'm not saying that your intentions are bad, I'm saying that we should not be fooling ourselves, because we are looking at a system that has no interest in actually serving people. The interest is actually to oppress and serve another class of people. So if I can just be literally, a little rhetorical, if you will, if we're fighting against slavery and we identify the slave catchers or the slave patrol as the problem and talk about abolishing the slave patrol, we're effectively leaving the slave system intact. So I think we need to actually look at that question in terms of what is the police and who do they actually serve. And I submit to you, it is a question, a brutal question of a system of capitalism and imperialism. And this also, we need to also, if I can say one more thing, I know I can go on and on, Kathie knows this. So in terms of the migrant crisis and also the disconnection we see in the grassroots and the local community, we also need to take on the ideological problems that masses are being bombarded with. So it could be Jay-Z, it could be 50 Cent. You know, these people, you know, need to be confronted because they are actually spewing out a lot of poison that is actually poisoning the minds of our youth.
I don't mean to say this coyly, but Jay-Z never put me in a headlock. Jay-Z never put me in a headlock. You know, I think that you're right. I want to touch on just 2 things if I could.
I mean, I'd like to speak to that later after you finish.
Number one, when it came to Tyre Nichols and the body cam footage, there's a double-edged swords on both ends of the fight, where you have in one scenario, you know, kind of this question of like whether or not it emboldens the police, but this other thing of, well, what happened to Tyre Nichols was so fucking brutal that the ruling class in this country just like couldn't get away with it. They had to charge those cops.
Yeah.
Or they were gonna have another rebellion on their hands. Like that's just what it is. And so like, yeah, exactly. You know, so it's kind of like there's a point to seeing like, all right, these people are sophisticated enough to respond to and actually like, you know, change up how they're gonna respond to different instances like this, right? Then when it comes to the ideologies among the people, I think you're absolutely right. You know, the overall thrust of our findings has been that these divisions that play out among the people, they have a source. You know, and it comes from the system that being, but it's also like preyed upon, it's developed, it's specialized, and overall it's used to maintain this division. You know, not just among poor black people, but also these other sections that we mentioned. You know, the question right now is like, where is the fight right now? Is the fight at the precincts for these motherfuckers who are killing our peers and killing our families? Or do we take it to like Jay-Z right now? You know, it's kind of, just to be a little bit, you know.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not personally attacking Jay-Z, but I'm talking about the problems we face in terms of culture and how that causes, one, the demobilization of masses of people, particularly people at the bottom of society. One reason why I talk about Jay-Z is he talks about how he was able to decode the system and become the entrepreneur that he is today. And that poison permeates among young people. We can talk about Killer Mike. We can talk about 50 Cent. Or we can talk about Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg, you know, a couple of years ago, talked about how Donald Trump was this flagrant racist. And just recently, he's talking about how Donald Trump did him solid. You know, so I think the thing is that young people follow this. And this is one element. And I'm not trying to, I think we can look at Jay-Z's practice also, but that kind of culture actually demobilizes people. and people think that somehow I gotta get mine. And that's what permeates things, and people are, like Kathie said, people are cognizant of police brutality. They're much more skeptical of the police, especially in the Bronx. Because in the Bronx, juries have historically been very skeptical of the police. And that goes way back to, the 90s and stuff like that. But I think that's something we need to actually take on, because this kind of poisonous thinking is demobilizing people. And this is one of the elements why we saw a total demobilization after 2020. Part of it is also we're in a tit for tat struggle with the powers that be, because they're putting out this stuff. They're consciously demobilizing people. And I don't know if Kathie raised this, but one of the things the October 22nd Coalition has put out is this summary in terms of why 2020, while it was a tremendous rocking the house we have never seen before, we have actually become somewhat very fascinating. So, I'll stop. I could go forever.
Thank you. I got you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Karma. I'm from Spain, from Barcelona. And thank you very much for sharing with us your stories. I just arrived to New York. I was here a few months. I wanted to come here because back in Barcelona I participated, and I still participate in it's like a group of people that people from the street, but also from the university. Like many people working and struggling against institutional violence. Reality in Spain is not the same as here, of course. Police brutality is not the same here as in Spain, but I just wanted to share with you that there is like this, that I can share with you later, the webpage where they kind of have done a map with all the brutality by cops and the institutional violence that shows like an image, like you can see how many people have been affected by that. And yeah, maybe because I just know of you today, I hope I will know more about you, but that you want to make it like transnational, no? Or maybe connecting with other parts of the world, so maybe you could connect with these people, and because, and kind of making a bigger, like organization against that. Yeah, of course, because despite the reality is different there and here, the questions are the same, right? Can we abolish the police? Can we? Of course, we can't. But yeah, I kind of think that there are options, there are ways, and as much as we are, the better, right? And yeah, I will just share with you these people, and maybe you're interested in making a connection or whatever. Thank you.
Is the mapping visualization the entire country?
Yeah, this mapping is Catalonia. It's just a part of Spain, but I say we are there. I also connected with other organizations from Spain and also other organizations from Europe. And yeah, they are kind under a bigger organization with other, But yeah, the map is only Catalonia. And again, the reality is not the same, They are not killing black people. And it's a totally different reality. But the impunity on how they work, and also what you were explaining on if you are recording them, they don't care. They don't care, We tried, and actually we gained that because something happened in Catalonia, and there was like many brutality from violence, police violence, and they weren't. They weren't showing the number of the, the identification I guess it's the same here, no? I mean, they have to have a number because you can't identify them because they are all, you can identify them, but with a number. And finally, they must show the number, but they still do the same, you know? They don't fucking care.
What do you call when they don't show the number?
Yeah, they don't care. But well, they're like, strategies, and also what you were saying, just making some kind of a safe place for the ones that have suffered or the ones that are in this movement to just listen to each other, and trying to, to be the much that the more than we can. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I?
Please, yeah.
Just since what's mentioned, for clarification, the Washington Post documentation, Fatal Force, it's good because it's national recognized media publication, so people trust it. It is very limited in scope, so I think as long as you understand what the limitations are, it's specifically people who have been killed by police who are on duty and shot to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's that limitation. So
It's very bent towards police.
So yeah, so George Floyd wouldn't be included in that, for instance. So I think as long as people are aware of like what it's counting, then you can just accept that. Okay, this is obviously a limited number, but otherwise they seem to be pretty consistent with and accurate with their documentation.
Right. Something related to that point too, like the limited scope of some of these investigations. A point that we made in this investigation, in this pamphlet, was not just to talk about, in the section on the homeless, how they've been preyed upon. We do actually get into the case of like Jordan Neely and his killer Daniel Penny, not because Daniel Penny was a cop, but because it's that, I hate to use the word, but like trickle down, there's a bit of like a trickle down impunity. Yeah. And like overall, like what these cops are like actually enforcing is a system of white supremacy, of like, capitalism, imperialism, than what somebody like Daniel Penny is doing. He's as much a free agent, a foot soldier, of that system.
Like George Zimmerman.
Yeah. And so it's like cops are the formal institutional layer of the system doing that, but then there's all these free agents. And the way that they operate and get to like, also get away with murder, it's a system that serves and churns that shit out, whether it's like in uniform or not in uniform.
And then of course, with the past few years, the emboldening of a lot of white nationalist militia and creepy neo-Nazis and all that.
Yeah. I mean, not to flatten all the distinctions, but yeah, I'm repping this like MD shirt and something they do like in their music and everything in that whole scene. It's like the cops, the KKK, like, it's like, why don't you ever see a cop and Klan in the same picture? It's, I think ideologically, it's more of an ideological argument that I want to make that yes, they enforce the same thing. So it's people who take it upon themselves to inflict this brutality on people. They don't need the marching orders because it's like almost programming that they have. I mean, this is a dude who was also an imperialist soldier, and he came back and it has continued to inflict brutality on people. So, yeah.
There's floating in the room. There's been this overall question of abolishing the police, and we touched on it here in the pamphlet because it is something that we took upon ourselves to ask the masses wherever we went, particularly like how they like whether this sounds like a good idea, abolishing the police and prisons outright, but also like trying to get into the weeds in the conversation of like, well, what would a better system of like social regulation look like? Because that's what it comes down to. Is like the police have a job, and that's social control, to like maintain the system. Earlier I said, you know, that real estate developers are like, they sick the police on the masses. It's not exactly the most like correct way of putting it. I think it's just more like that's their job. That's the role they play. You know, a pig is a pig, a cop is a cop. You know, and so their job is to maintain this oppression of the people, to maintain crime, maintain these divisions among the people, right? But just because, you know, we go and we spoke to people about abolition, it's like, well, no, that doesn't sound good at all. Like, who's gonna come and like, you know, protect these people from like the drug dealers, the gangbangers, these, you know, elements among the people? Yeah. But that's what I'm saying, right? It's like, just because like, you know, people say like, no, we can't, like, we shouldn't abolish the police, doesn't give us like the free thing of like, oh, then that, we have to be the answer. Like, we have to be the way out, you know? And so it's like, on one hand you have like the victims of police brutality who like are asking for like this unity, who are like, you know, the stuff I read coming out of 022 was very important for my development in the sense of like these like networks of care, this like scientific approach to like documenting every instance of police brutality. That's like a strong starting point, you know. But also it's like, what is the alternative? What is well, if we know that the police are here to like keep all this shit going, then what is all that shit in the first place? And it's the same system that is like, you know, sending these RoboCops out to like do their job and oppress the people. It's the same system that like uproots hundreds of thousands of people around the world because of imperial conflict, because of like wars of aggression between rival countries in Europe who just want a bigger slice of the pie of the world, their resources, you know? The United States being like the top dog and all that, you know, they have a very fortunate circumstance where they can give these police $100,000 salaries, give the other agents of oppression, whether it be like social workers, these other, you know, our friend from Barcelona was talking about, like just these other kind of like policing forms of institutional oppression in the system. All this is related. We can't abolish the police without abolishing the system that created them. Straight up. And I will not go out to the masses and like spit some reformist illusion bullshit, because they're not even talking about it. They're not even saying, oh, like we should abolish the police, because they live through the reality of poverty and territory and the oppression of the system, you know? But there's also an amnesia among the people. This country, for all the white supremacist bullshit and all like the oppression, all the terrible, terrible shit it's known for, there is a history of struggle here that is lost on the people because of the dictatorship that we live under. Hundreds of years of struggle coming from slavery, you know, civil rights, the efforts of the Black Panthers, you know, you have the early communist movement in this country. These things all matter, and people have forgotten them, you know? So it's like, if you want to talk like ideological struggle, it's like we have to like bring this back on the table. The people coming out and taking it upon themselves to change history. We can't do that if we don't have the answers to what's going on. And so that's why we set out to do this in the first place, you know? And when we talk about the Klan, we're talking about, you know, the connections like fascism and white supremacy. It's like, we look to groups like the Black Panthers who would pull up on pigs with guns and say, we're not fucking going anywhere. But even as early, like as recent as the 1990s and early 2000s, we had Anti-Racist Action, which was a network of young people who like took it to Nazis and took it to the Klan and took it to the cops, started a cop watch to like, you know, keep an eye on them and like mobilize the masses to do the same. And then it goes without saying, yeah, 022, you know? So that's kind of, when it comes to this question of abolishing the police, it's like, we can't foster illusions among the people. And that's kind of why we don't call ourselves like abolitionists or something like that, you know? Our mission is very clear. We go to the masses and we organize them and struggle against their enemy. But that's my rant, sorry.
I've got a couple more, you know, we have a few minutes left, there's no rush. So if there's any more questions or any more comments, and if there's anything more that our panelists want to say.
I want to say that I'm going to remove police from mental health response. So I don't know about abolishing police completely or whatever, but for my part and ERD's memory, we're working right now to make sure police don't respond to people with mental illness. I don't know how long that's gonna take. I'm gonna go through all the avenues I can. And if it's the legislators and the politicians who are telling us to vote, I'm voting for them and going to them and telling them, you're gonna remove police and this is how you're gonna do it. We have a plan. We're called peers, you know? Everyone knows what it is to either meet someone who maybe had a mental health crisis or who's dealing with it themselves. And like you said, the police don't need to respond. If we can be empathetic enough and we can be compassionate enough and make sure that we meet people while they're in crisis, just on a human level, then I think that it's gonna go far. So for me, that I'm gonna say that we're gonna remove police at least from mental health crisis response. So peers, yeah, just someone with lived mental health experience who's willing to meet people when they're in crisis. And you could be trained, but you cannot be trained, you know? Like you just gotta see that something's wrong and just be willing to help, be willing to be there, be willing to listen, you know, culturally informed, trauma informed, and, you know, where police don't come and just shoot you because you're struggling. We've all struggled. You know, we're all maybe one situation, one crisis, one bill, you know, one tragedy from, you know, maybe not being able to function at our best. So that's what I'm working on, and who I'm working with people who have that same mission as me, and not just saying it, like have a plan, like this is how we're gonna do it. So yeah, if you guys wanna follow Justice for ERD and see what we do, I appreciate it.
Yeah, police shouldn't be the #1 responders for people with mental health crisis. Just like in the situation with another victim in 2012, Mohammed Ba, he was having a mental health issue crisis, and his mother called for an ambulance. Instead, the emergency unit police showed up, and they ended up gunning him down also in 2012. So, yeah, like I said, police shouldn't be the #1 responders. You know, people with mental health crisis, they need help. They don't need lead.